Don't be a boss, be a leader. We got to make sure that the capitalistic system is not destroyed. We do not fall prey to the communistic, socialistic philosophies based on wealth distribution. First, you got to make the wealth, otherwise, there's nothing to distribute. Large companies have to share the profits with the workers, but let smaller companies totally free, totally the capitalistic way, right? We have not educated the public, right? How important freedom is, right? But we get more and more bureaucrats.
You know the magnet culture, right? Nobody works for me. You people work with me. I'm working for you.
The roots of the magnet culture began when Frank introduced a profit-sharing plan in his factories. He calls it fair enterprise. Wall Street calls it Frank Stronach's success formula.
I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either.
And that's why Frank created a corporate constitution and an employees' charter that are unique in the world of business.
Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another truly inspired conversation. This is a great pleasure, a great honor to bring on a guest today that I've known for 15 years, an incredible human being, an incredible businessman, and a true visionary, someone who built a massive, one of the biggest companies in the world with 180,000 employees, and who has left that world in order to help build, as he says it, an ideal society. And he is truly a visionary. So please welcome with me Canadian business titan and wonderful human being, Frank Stronach. It's great to have you, sir.
Nice to be with you, John.
Such a pleasure. Frank, your story is truly extraordinary. A lot of people claim that they have started their empires in a garage, but then you find out their parents were very wealthy or they had big people behind them. But you truly started something incredible all those more than 70 years ago now, when you left Austria at a very young age with basically no money in your pocket, and you started building something that is today, feeding millions of families, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Can you share a little bit about those beginning days of your life in business when you came to Canada?
Well, I grew up in a working class family, and so I had no great philosophies. I just wanted to see the world, and I heard a lot of news, or when you talk to people, if you've been in America or Canada, if you work for half a year, you could afford to buy a car. And in my case, I had a bicycle I had to split with my sister. So that was a great incentive, right? But again, I had no great philosophies. I applied to a visa in South Africa, Australia, the United States, and Canada. And Canada came forward with a visa. Sometimes a little hard on the Canadian bureaucracy, but I'm saying they're still the best because they were first to come forward with the visa. So I wind up in Canada.
That's an incredible story in and of itself. But you came to Canada on a ship with $200.
Yes, I took the cheapest ride from Europe how to get to Canada, right? So it was a coal freighter, but it had a few cabins, right, where you could stay, right? So anyway, I was pretty seasick, so it was a long ride. So in 1954, I was 20 years of age, right? I arrived in Toronto. I didn't know anybody. I had $200 in my pocket, but after a few weeks, I found a job. Right, I'm a tool and die maker by trade, and so I found a job. It was a small company, 10 people. After a few months, the owner said to me, "Frank, you're doing a great job. I want you to be a partner of mine." My chest swelled a little, and but he was a great man, but he never wrote it down. So after a while, I said, "Look, there's nothing to it to run a company." I looked in the papers, I found the job, I got paid double the monies. So anyway, by 1957, 3 years later, I had $5,000 saved up. $5,000 in 1957, you could buy a small house or for a small farm. I rented a small building about the size of a 3 or 4 car garage. And I bought a few used pieces of equipment. And out I went hustling. I went in the factories and I said, I'm very good in solving problems. If I can't solve the problems, you don't have to pay me. Obviously, I solved some problems because after 1 month, I hired an employee. After 1 year, I had 10 employees. After 2 years, 20.
That's incredible. That is incredible. So from there on, 20 employees. How did how did that happen to from 20 to later 180,000? Did you know that you were going to grow a massive business, or were you just taking it step by step, or did you have that big vision?
No, of course you don't really, because life is really a question of fate and circumstances, being at the right place at the right time with the right ingredients. But so you go to stages, to evolutionary stages in life, right? So that was one. After 3 years, I said I had 3 years in business, I had 20 employees, and I noticed my foreman was a little different. And I said, Herman, what's the matter with you lately? So he said, that was my foreman, right? So he said, look, Frank, I'm I'm thinking of starting my own business. So I said, well, I sympathize with that. I understand that. So I said, look, let's talk tomorrow. Maybe we find a better answer. So that evening I was talking to myself and I said, if that foreman's got to leave me, that would stifle my growth. I didn't like that. The second reason was, if that foreman's got to leave me, I got all the work myself. I liked it even less. The third reason was, if I hire a new foreman and I don't show him how a business is run, I still got to do all the work myself. And if I hire a new foreman, I show him how business is run. After 1 or 2 years, he might say, look, I got to start my own business. To make a long story short, the next day I said to Herman, why don't we start a new company together? He said, you mean it? I said, yes. We went right away to a lawyer, and he wrote up an agreement. And so I said to him, you have 1/3 of the company, I had 2/3. And so after a few months, he started that company, and he was so proud. He was, he worked like crazy. That was his company, and so what I've done over the next 5 years, every year I've done a similar deal with Herman. So after 5 years, I had an incredible cash flow, right? I might have been close to $1 billion, right? So I became a little sentimental because there was times when I was hungry not because I wanted to lose weight. I was hungry because I had no money to buy food. So if you experience things like that, that never leaves your soul, right? So anyway, when I had this private company going like crazy, I said, gee, if I gotta get the workers involved, maybe it's great for the workers, and it's great for me, right? So I transferred the private company to a public company, and so after a few years in the public company, I put in a corporate constitution, a corporate charter. Basically, the main principle in the corporate charter was, how do we distribute the profit? The profit we distributed was 20% of the shareholders in the form of a dividend, 10% the workers got over and above their wages, management got 6%, and research we allocated 7%, and for charity 2%. When I put in this charter, the first year our profit climbed by 40%, the second year 100%, and the third year 200%. What I'd like to demonstrate is, if you let workers participate in a tangible way in profit sharing, you release an energy of untold proportions, because they're on the front line. They can see how can you make a product better, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the great thing about it, right? And I want to call it that knowledge, what I accumulated, I want to leave that for younger generation.
Frank, when you introduced this economic charter as part of the company's constitution, Did you get backlash from your shareholders in the beginning before this took effect?
No, the funny thing, I didn't, because the first year when our profits were up 40%, right? So on the annual meeting, the shareholders clapped and said, "Look, you've done a great job. That seems to work." And especially the second year when we were up 100% and then 200%. So there was no, it happened pretty quick, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Did you ever heard of the golden rule?
You mean the one, what's it say? He who has the gold makes the rules? Is that the one?
Exactly. That's the only golden rule there is. Who
Yeah.
has the gold? He makes the rule, But now you don't see the rulers no more, right? The rulers might be in Hawaii, might be in Beverly Hills, or might be in Monaco,
Mhm.
And so basically, I call them the financial elite. And the financial elite doesn't really want to, they really don't want to share the profits with the working class, right? So basically, uh, look, what it boils down to, there's two economic cultures rising, right? The one is practiced, the communistic one is practiced by Russia and China, and the capitalistic one is practiced by the Western world and the United States and Canada. But basically, the Chinese-Russian kind of economic culture is 10% of their population are the military. Another 10% are what we call the supercrats. Okay? So basically, the 20% tell the 80% of the population, look, don't cross the line. Otherwise, there's a problem. So, in essence, yes, some of the workers maybe have a better life, better food, better housing, but, you know, people give their lives to have freedom, right? All the people which came to America they were looking for freedom, right? Because in Europe and all over there, the kings, et cetera, right? So freedom is call it the highest rating. So this is lacking in that system. But then you got the capitalistic system, right? Basically, what you have there, that's basically self-destroying unless we do something about it. Why do I say it's self-destroying? In nature, when a species does not reproduce itself, another species will take over. And the laws of nature are much stronger than any man-made law, right? But the case is every day there's less capitalists, right? So basically, the message I want to get across is we should not destroy capitalism. Okay, so basically, I'm saying we must let the capitalism or free enterprise, let them grow in small companies. Companies, small company would be 300 employee or less. So let them grow. Let the entrepreneurs let them grow. Let them make a 50 million or 100 million, whatever. When companies get larger, I'm saying yes, still capitalism, but they got to be harnessed to a certain extent, right? So basically, I'm saying companies over 300 employees must share the profits with the workers.
This has been your philosophy ever since I've known you and known your work. What is interesting is you're saying in Canada, you have this economic charter of rights that you want to implement and that you want to see be implemented actually in the Constitution of Canada. So, as someone who values free enterprise, it's also, on the other hand, you're saying, but we should have some guardrails and saying sharing profit, making this basically a law. Why do you think it needs to be done this way? And why do you think more companies don't do it naturally, seeing your success and other companies' successes?
That's exactly what I want. I want to preach, right? I want to get across loud and clear. We should not destroy capitalism. Basically, I'm saying, look, the funny thing is, all politicians and all business people agree if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. If the economy doesn't work, you cannot feed the hungry, He cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. But we don't talk what drives the economy. It's the economy, the economy, the economy. If the economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. The message I want to get across loud and clear is, without workers, you can't make a profit. Workers have a moral right. So in essence, I don't preach we should take away from the rich. I'm preaching we must make capitalists out of the workers. We must let workers participate when we bake the economic pie. And when workers participate, everybody gets a bigger slice. That's the sole purpose. That's the purpose of the economic charter, right? This way we could protect capitalism. But if we don't, right? Because right now the divide between the very rich and the working class gets wider and wider and wider. So basically, when you look maybe 50 years or 100 years down the road, you might wind up there's only 50 capitalists in the world. It's another form of kingdom. It must be. Look, it's free enterprise. We must let smaller companies, below 300, let them make pure capitalism or call it free enterprise, because free enterprise is the foundation for a free society.
But but Frank, realistically speaking, you're not talking about the capitalism or free enterprise of the year 2026. You're talking about a capitalism that was truly free, where you didn't have this overarching bureaucracy and regulations where people's hands were tied. You're talking about get rid of all regulations, get rid of all bureaucracy that is not concerned with human safety, worker safety, and the safety which is so important to you of nature and the environment, right? So it's not only let workers share in the profit. We need to free entrepreneurs from all these rules and restrictions that keep them stifled, right?
Yeah, let me give you some examples, right? Uh, when I opened up my first company, I had a sign out there in the building, "Do and Die, open for business." I didn't need any permits, none whatsoever. I gone in the factories and I said to them, "Look, I've been great in solving problems. If you can't solve them, you don't have to pay me," right? And then, that was 65 years ago. 60 years ago, I built my first new factory in a small town a little north of Toronto, right? I had a set of blueprints. I went to the city hall. I asked for the building inspector. I showed him the blueprints. So he looked at them and he said, "Look, they're stamped by a qualified engineer for snow load, wind load, and sewage." He said, "We're so glad you built a factory now in our town, and here's your permit." I had it the same day. Now, as an example, I wanted to build a farmer's market, and so I submitted I don't want to name the township. I submitted the proposal for a farmer's market. So after a few months, because I didn't get any reply, after a few months, when I called the township, "What about my permit for a farmer's market?" "Well," they said, "your permit did not comply with the bylaws of this town." I said, "What's the bylaws?" "Well," they say, "for instance," they said, "you applied for 5,000 square feet for a farmer's market, and our bylaws only allow 3,000 square feet," right? I said, "That's nice to hear that the bureaucrats know how many potatoes I could sell or tomatoes," right? But anyway, the bureaucracy has grown to think that we're practically wiping out small business, right? They bully the red tape and change. So basically, and that's you have that in Canada to a certain extent too in the States. In the States, the one thing I think the President Donald Trump did great is where he says, "Look, the days are gone where everybody could dump or everybody should ship in the products into the USA. From now on, we got to make things in the USA, right?" So that's a great thing here, right? Because about 40, 50 years ago, Wall Street was pushing business. You got to make more profits. Unions were pushing business. We want to have higher wages. So business just went to China, okay? And now we've seen we hardly make things in things, so hopefully we can reverse it. So that's a great thing the president did, right? So that's so we gotta be aware of, right? The bureaucracy has increased like incredible, right? So basically, the problem with democracy is like Europe's gone socialistic, right? Because and pretty well everybody else besides the United States, right? They go so because there you have the politicians, right? They want to be so badly elected or re-elected. So they do everything they can. They come forward with programs which sounds great to the people, and so the program, then the politician hire bureaucrats to fine tune the program. So there's millions and hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats get hired practically every year, right? Okay, because every when the election time is up, they got to come forward with programs to be elected, and what they do is they just print monies. And so that's why when they think like every time there's a new program, they got to hire new bureaucrats, and so the bureaucracy is climbing and climbing and climbing. So we got to make sure, right? We got to stop that.
You walked away from Magna, from the daily business of Magna some 15, 16 years ago. And around that time, I got to meet you. And you said to me, you can always make money, but there are more important things to do. You're still involved in business, but this is your main, for you to, the way that you work every day to help make a better society, create a better society is truly inspiring. And you're now at the, young age of 93 years old.
I'm
What was
glad you
the,
said young age.
yeah, young age. What was it? What was the moment where you
Well,
knew you needed
basically,
to take?
when you get older, right? When I was 80 years of age, I looked in the mirror and I said, "What's the purpose of life? Life has been incredibly great to me. You know what I mean? I'm blessed with good health and blessed with a good mind. But I say it doesn't matter how smart you are. If the stars are not aligned, things don't work." So anyway, when I was staying in 80, I kind of reflected on my life and I said, "Frank, you thought you were so smart, but you've been missing a lot of things." Because I was about on the boards of 8 universities. I gave lectures right from Harvard, right across the States, right across Canada, right across Europe, right? So I did not, I wasn't innovative. I done the usual things, right, what directors do. So I came to the conclusion, what is the mandate of a university? The mandate of a university is to teach young people how can we have a more civilized life. Or better yet, they could experiment with structures. Which structures do we need that we have a current and ideal society, right? Yes, universities get great faculties in regards to medicine, technology, and the art, but very little on humanity. Okay, so basically, I said to myself, "Gee, I'm involved in. I don't want to be a hypocrite, right? I'm involved in a large cars, with gasoline, any gasolines, and the carbon monoxide, the traffic jams, the inhaling of the thing." I said, "That's okay." So I said, maybe I got to do something else. So I said to myself, well, maybe I could maybe make a greater contribution to society if I go into the agriculture. So I sold the thing for quite a bit of money, about $1 billion or so, right? And I went into the agriculture, right? But when I went into the agriculture, I realized I worked in a chemical jungle. When we think of the food being eaten every day, 95% of the food eaten in the United States and Canada comes from industrial farms. In industrial farms, you see no more eagles fly. Why? There's no more rabbits. There's no pheasants. We spray so much fungicide and pesticides, we practically kill everything here, right? So anyway, so my mission was, I should do some farming and grow organic food, right? But that's one thing. But the real mission was, I came to the conclusion that we need an economic charter of rights, right? In essence, I'm saying the human charter of rights in the United States or Canada is not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. But keep in mind, whatever we do, we cannot use a chainsaw approach. We must be civilized. Okay, we have way too many bureaucrats. We could send home about 3/4 of the bureaucrats, right, in the States as well as in Canada. But it's got to be civilized. They will get a 5-year payout, where every year maybe 5 or 10% less. If they find a job in the private industry, they will get a bonus. So you can only bring changes in a civilized way. But we must set small business free. Small business make very little profits. So small business should not pay a business tax. Small business wants to grow. And in order to grow, they got to hire employees. Employees pay a wage tax. So the governments make more money when small business grow. So basically we got it the other way around. So basically now for small business to take off is practically impossible, right? And when you think small business took care of themselves, right? They had the vice councils here for bricklayers, for plumbers, for electricians, etc., etc. They've done a great job, right? And so basically we should say, like small business should pay no business tax, and they should regulate themselves. Yes, we need regulation, workplace safety, the environment, and ethics, yes, but small business could do it. Small business has always been the backbone of any country, the United States as well as Canada, so that's very important, right? So, so the economic charter's got 7 economic principles. So one is a country should not have debt, must have balanced budgets, okay? Number 2 is the bureaucracy must be in relationship to the population, a percentage, right? The last, I think about 2 years ago, a thing came out on small business or bureaucrats. Canada had 100 bureaucrats per 1,000 people. The United States had 70 bureaucrats per 1,000 people. Japan had 40 bureaucrats per 1,000 people. I would say about 10 or 20% of bureaucrats would be plenty, right? Okay. So, so yeah, and number 3 is the tax system's got to be black and white. No more loopholes. If you make more profits, you pay a higher rate. If you make less profits, you pay a lower rate. But no more loopholes, right? When you take a look, the interesting thing, I listened once years ago to the president, to Reagan, right? He quoted took a paragraph out of the American tax code and said, "This is so convoluted," right? I guess I haven't got the paragraph, but I should send it down to you. It's such a convoluted thing here. And 100 years ago, the United States had about 28 pages in the tax code, and now it's over 4,000 pages thereabouts, with thousands and thousands of rules and regulations, and one is more convoluted than the other. So the tax system's got to be, number 4 is small business must be freed from all the chains and let it be free enterprise, pure capitalism. And when small companies get larger, over 300, then they got to share the profits with the employees. And that's number 6, and no, that's 5. Number 6 is High school should stop at grade 10. Then students should be exposed to the trades, the skilled trade. And so that's a win for the students, because the more wisdom you collect, the higher your pay, right? Because a country cannot make products unless there's skilled labor. Okay, and we have neglected that, right? But the United States now, they've recognized that since Donald Trump, and they working very hard on that to get skilled labor, because without skilled labor you can make no products. It's the same thing. A farmer hasn't got seeds, he cannot produce food. Okay, and number 7 is no kid, United States or Canada, should go to school hungry. That means breakfast got to be served. No kid in the United States or Canada should leave the school, so lunch has got to be served. And by law, the food would have to be organic. So that's basically a very simple thing here. And I think we could eliminate poverty, and we could, if you're not economically free, you're not a free person. So very few people are economically free in the States or Canada. So in the States or Canada, it's similar settings of lifestyle. Some saying if an American or Canadian woman works for 30 years, or a Canadian American man, if they work for 30 years, they should have enough accumulated that they own their own house or condo mortgage free, and have at least $300,000 in the bank to subsidize their old age pension, so they can choose their own route to happiness for the remaining years. So, but how many do you know which no mortgage, no thing? We have advanced in technology to such a degree, but we're going backwards. The living standard's gone backwards in the United States and enormously in Canada, right? So there's something wrong with the system.
I couldn't agree more with you, Frank. And you have when you kind of returned to Austria and started a political movement, that's where we met. And you were introducing a lot of similar ideas, which are so common sense and which are so great, but you got a lot of resistance, and the media treated you incredibly badly. The system treated you badly. The same is now happening in Canada since you started the Economic Charter of Rights. Number one, why do you think there's such resistance? And number two, how come I'm really always amazed at how calm you stay when people attack you and they're running bad attacks against you, but you never scoop to that level. You always stay above it. How do you do that?
Well, basically, we have a conscience, right? I waited till I came forward with economic charter of rights, right? And I wrote a column for a number of years in the most popular paper, right? It's the Financial Post in Canada. But when I started to, because what you usually read in papers is the problem, but never solutions. So what I've done that, when I started to write, I said, this is the problem, and this is the solution. I wouldn't know I would wind up with a lot of poison arrows. So I waited till at a certain age. Do I like it? Of course not. But I have a conscience that I say life's been incredible, great to me, and society is subject to the people, right? People gave their lives for freedom, right? So I just said, look, my mission is I'd like to see Canada as the first country in the world with an economic charter of rights in its constitution. I would like to see also that the United States would have an economic charter of rights. And I think if the president would know more about it, I think he would invite me and say, Frank, can you explain a bit on the economic charter? Because basically I've practiced when I built Magna, right? Those were the forerunners of an economic charter of rights, right? Because without workers, look, if they get a portion, right, that releases an energy of incredible energy, right? We need that in the States, right? So I've done a practical, by evolutionary processes, I came to that formula, right? Okay, so I hope a lot of American viewers see that, and I hope it gets to the thing, the economic charter of rights, very civilized or very civilized, I should say, to bring about change. But we could eliminate poverty, and to a great extent, people would be economically free.
Frank, because you want this to become part of the Constitution in Canada, what how can people support this work, and what steps are you taking to make that happen?
Well, what we do is over and above is pretty well all the trade association and so on. They don't really ring the alarm bells, right? Because the living standards get down enormously in the States as well as in Canada, right? So basically, I'm saying the various, like the Chamber of Commerce, I said, they're not really, they're part of the system. We got to change the system. So basically, I'm saying we created a new wave of common sense business, a new wave common sense business association, right? You could join that, right? Practically free, and it's got to come. Small business should become a huge political force, okay, and bring about change. Okay,
Okay.
that is the key, right? Because I think there's enough small business because our educational system isn't geared. We're not teaching people how to be free, how to understand the economy. We have, there's exceptions, but in most university, most thing here, when they teach about the economy, most of those professors still pay their monthly rate on a car, right? How can you teach to be a billionaire, a millionaire, whatever, right? Free enterprise, capitalistic system. But again, the capitalistic system, we should not destroy it because we must set it free. But above 300 employees, it needs harnessing.
Okay. I always loved your ideas, and I want to invite people to visit your website. We're going to put a link down below, and they can become ambassadors, as I saw. I would like to shift gears here towards the end of the conversation just a little bit. People that know you know how brilliant of a businessman you are. They know how brilliant of a company you've built. What most people don't know is the heart, the golden heart that you have. You have helped so many people along their way. You are a great supporter of young visionaries and young entrepreneurs. You love animals. You've helped revolutionize some of the help change some of the problems in horse racing and so forth. People don't know that side, and I know you don't like talking about that as much. Even your advisors back in the day, your political advisors, urged you to talk more about it, but you do a lot of good things without ever talking about it. Was that something that was always in you, or did that come later in life with sort of experience and money?
Well, I've been very fortunate, and I have a conscience. Yes, I have been involved. So the very key is like that the growth of Magna. I think one is profit sharing is a key, and then the hotline when people can call a hotline, like of the 180,000 employees or workers I had employed, one third of them were women. Right, we have over 60,000 women. Right, so not only men and women, they can call a hotline if something isn't right. Okay, and we had very qualified former police officers which investigated, right, because any wrongdoing, the key is you can only grow a company if you make sure they're happy. Every day I went to work, I always ask myself, what do I have to do that workers respect me? So the most important thing is have a system where you make sure that nothing penetrates which would upset employees or which they seem it isn't fair. So over and over you gotta think what you have to do that employees respect management. So basically, we don't want to have bosses. We want to have leaders, right? Okay. Society came a long way from the caveman to the hunted, to the kings and to the servants, and now we have bosses and unhappy employees. So the reason why I grew that well is I treated my employees as partners. Okay, and we teach that they don't be a boss, be a leader. Okay, so it's very important, right? We gotta make sure that the capitalistic system is not destroyed. Okay, but if the divide is so great, right, that the poverty is so great, because in the inner cities in America there's huge poverty, right? We got to make sure that we can eliminate that, right? Okay, so I think we're at the crossroad where we got to make sure we do not, we do not fall prey to the communistic, socialistic philosophies, because they're based on wealth distribution. First, you got to make the wealth, otherwise there's nothing to distribute. But we need, large companies have to share the profits with the workers, but let smaller companies totally free, totally the capitalistic way, right? Let the entrepreneurs make 50 million or 100 million, right? Okay, so we gotta think in those terms, and we gotta make sure that there's a business, a common sense business, the New Wave Common Sense Business Association. Got to join that because it's they have, it's expected that small companies have more common sense if you let them participate, right? Because the public, we have not educated the public, right? How important freedom is, right? That's why all the people from here, they all wanted to come to America because the freedom, right? But we get more and more bureaucrats. Okay.
Indeed. Frank, last question. I mentioned earlier that you're 93 years young. You don't look the part. Your mind is sharp. Your body is sharp. What's your secret? That's the greatest advice I want to hear.
Well, basically, you gotta always think, right? The most important thing is how to stay healthy. So you gotta read about food in books, right? You gotta be okay, and you try to be happy and healthy. Uh, you know. I'm living outside in the country, right? And occasionally have to go downtown, and the traffic jams. You inhale all the carbon monoxide. So it's constantly thinking what you got to do, right? Do a little sport, do a thing here, but try positive. Always look for a better solution, right? And experiment a bit what you eat, right? If you get a chance, then you should try to eat chemical-free foods, right? That's very important.
Yes, and I got to let our viewers in on a little secret. 3 years ago, Frank, I called you for your birthday, and we were FaceTiming, and you were on the tennis court, and you said, "I got to call you back. I'm in the middle of a tennis match," and I was like, "This is where I want to be when I turn 90. I want to be on a tennis court." And people, I love your quote. You always say, "I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up," and you still say that. It's wonderful. Frank, I want to thank you so much for all the work that you do, and for who you are, and for your tireless enthusiasm and inspiration to the people. It's contagious.
Okay, we should do again another broadcast too, because I think it's life changing, right? The economic charters. Look, when it comes down, you cannot have democracies unless you have an economic charter of rights. I mean, the human charter of rights alone is not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. And we are not talking about taking away from the rich. Basically, I'm saying we gotta be careful, right? That society doesn't get socialistic, communistic all the way, right? Because that really would be a problem.
I agree. Frank Stronach, thank you once again. We look forward to the next conversation. And Inspire Tribe, I want to invite you to visit the website, link down below to the Economic Charter of Rights. This is a Canadian project, but it is intended to spread across all nations, including the United States. So please get involved and educate yourselves. This is a great, great project.
Great
Frank,
to be with you, John. Right, till next time. Thank you.
thank you, sir. And Inspire Tribe, thank you so much for tuning in. You know we love you. We appreciate you. And we'll be back with you again very, very soon. Your environment shapes everything, your thoughts, your health, your energy. But most people never question the invisible field they live in. We did, and that's when FLFE found us. It's not a product, it's a field of pure life force energy that lifts everything it touches. We now live in it 24/7, and we would love to invite you to experience it too. Start your free 15-day trial now. No pressure, no strings attached. Just the truth, resonance, and peace.